you're watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Well, 3 days after the Uri terror attack, India is still contemplating what its next steps will be. What is clear is that India is preparing for a diplomatic offensive, in particular with the UN General Assembly underway and Sushma Swaraj slated to speak there in a few days from now. Now, the question is, what else can India do diplomatically? One of the ideas that has been suggested is for India to come together with other countries such as Bangladesh and Afghanistan and boycott the SAARC summit that takes place in November. That's a question I asked Afghanistan's ambassador to India today, and interestingly, he says it's something that shouldn't be kept off the table. He doesn't rule it out. The question, though, that we're asking tonight is whether that is a feasible idea and whether India should in fact boycott the SAARC summit as a diplomatic tool in its armour. Well, among the other developments today, there has been a major encounter, another fierce encounter in fact, that has taken place in Uri. There are an unspecified number of terrorists that are believed to have infiltrated. The army is not putting a number on it. We know that an encounter is still underway. It is not over. There are possibly terrorist casualties as well. Again, the army not putting a number on that just yet. There have been varying reports about that through the day, but the army cautiously putting out statements at the moment. I think they're waiting for that operation to end before they reveal anything more. I spoke to Afghanistan's ambassador to India earlier today. Let's listen in. So thank you for speaking to us. Today, President Ghani had a phone conversation with Prime Minister Modi and condemned the attack in Uri, expressed solidarity with India. How much of a menace is Pakistan, according to you, in the neighborhood at this point?
Well, Afghanistan, as you know, has been the biggest victim of terrorism in this part of the world. And we've been suffering for decades now. And we had told and warned the world community and countries in this region that Afghanistan will not be the only country to suffer forever lonely, that others will suffer with us. I'm very upset to see the spillover effects all over, including India. So we have to find a solution for the problem that has been there, and it will spread over in a much more lethal way if we don't stop it.
On the Uri attack in particular, do you believe that this could be a turning point in the way India looks at Pakistan-sponsored terror and the entire region, including Afghanistan, looks at terror from Pakistan?
I mean, there must be zero tolerance. It must end. We have been seeing the signs of terrorism becoming much more lethal and becoming very systematic. This is a state-sponsored terrorism. It's no more an issue of non-state actors that we've been hearing for a long time. Now, ample proof of this as state-sponsored terrorism, and therefore we have to revisit our mechanisms that we've been using against terrorism. We have a global war on terror effort that must be revisited. We have to draw a line between a country that sponsors terrorism and a country that is an ally in the war against terrorism. So that difference must be made, and this should be made immediately.
And what is, according to you, then the biggest problem in this global fight against terrorism? Because it's astounding that in 2016 we cannot even agree, the whole world cannot agree what terrorism is, what the definition of terrorism is. Doesn't the basic problem start there?
Absolutely. We have been against the narrative that is used against terrorism because we see a blind eye being turned to countries that are systematically using terrorism against other peaceful nations. Therefore, the very definition of terrorism has to be looked at. We know what terrorism means, and we should not distinguish between terrorism in whatever form it is. And there should never be any definition that will call or that will term a terrorist group to be a freedom fighter or whatever other label that is being made for those terrorist groups. Therefore, you are completely right that terrorism and the definition of terrorism has to be defined properly and has to be revisited.
When you said that there needs to be zero tolerance now towards terrorism after Uri and that the world needs to come together, what is the message Afghanistan would give to the rest of the world on Pakistan-sponsored terror?
Zero tolerance means because Afghanistan, particularly India, did everything they could to make peace with our neighbor. despite all what we did, especially in Afghanistan, our government in the last 2 years did everything it could unimaginably in the past 2 years. Yet we saw more intensity. The reciprocity to our peaceful effort was only intensification of terrorism from across the border. And you see what is going on in Afghanistan right now. Therefore, there should be no any compromise from now on. And we must send a decisive message that if one can do terrorism to others, they will never be free to exercise that behavior, and there will be a strong reply to what they've been doing.
How will that message be made, according to you? How do you think India and other countries, Afghanistan and other countries can come together? How do we move forward on this diplomatically?
Well, first of all, we must unite at the regional level. We are individually dealing with the problem of terrorism from across the border. Unfortunately, the unity that is required at the regional level, is not there.
You mean South Asia?
Absolutely right. Especially in our region, we have been divided in the war against terrorism. Unfortunately for our national interests, whatever interests some countries have defined them, we have to unite against terrorism in the outset at the regional level. And then at that regional level unity, we can go on to the international stage, to the United Nations, to the global community. We have to bring along the world community against a menace that is affecting today this region.
And a state-sponsored menace.
Absolutely. State-sponsored terrorism must be dealt with accordingly.
It's not, but my only skepticism is, it's not like the world has not known and it has not seen the evidence of that state-sponsored terrorism. And the Mumbai attack of 2008 was perhaps the most visible evidence of that in recent years. And yet, we run around in the same circles all the time. Why will this be different?
That is the problem that we are basically dealing with. And we have to ask this question at the global stage as to why, despite all the evidence we see, in Afghanistan, in India, a direct state sponsorship of terrorism, yet the countries in the world are not dealing accordingly. And that question must be asked seriously. And we have to draw a line, also at the global level, between states who come along with countries like Afghanistan, India, who are peaceful nations, who want to make peace with neighbors, and the countries that will continue to turn a blind eye. That definition and that division must be created now.
Well, you've talked about regional unity in South Asia, and I would assume you're talking about India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, certainly. One of the things that is being suggested after the Uri attack is for India, Bangladesh and Afghanistan to come together and possibly boycott the SAARC summit in Pakistan, which is coming up in November. Do you think that's possible?
Well, you see, we have to make sure that we bring the maximum number of countries. And I'm sure at the regional level, most of the countries in South Asia are in line with what we've been seeking, Afghanistan and India. Therefore, the effort should be a comprehensive one, and we should include as many as possible. And definitely we should single out a country that spoils.
Pakistan should be singled out.
A country that spoils our unity, that spoils the country's regional stability and peace, and that stops integration and connectivity between countries.
So you're saying that a boycott of the SAARC summit should be considered jointly
by
South
Asian countries? If we don't see any success in the mechanism that we have created, the very basic reason for SAARC is also regional unity, regional integrity and peace. If that SAARC is sabotaged, if the effort of SAARC is sabotaged, we must single out whoever that is.
So that means if all these countries, if India, Bangladesh and Afghanistan decide that we're not going to go to this SAARC meeting.
We are 8 countries. We are 8 countries.
So you want more countries on
board? We
board?
have to bring along most of them.
In order to do that?
In order to send a strong message that SAARC belongs to 8 countries, not to 1 country. Therefore, any country who sabotages, who hijacks this great mechanism that we have in the region, must be sent a strong message.
So you're not ruling it out, you're saying bring more countries in the SAARC region on board?
Any measure that brings peace, stability, and unity in this region should not be ruled out.
All right. Well, that's a very significant statement you make there, Ambassador. Thank you very much for speaking to us today. And once again, Afghanistan continues to be a strong supporter of India in these difficult times. As we've been saying from the beginning, you yourself have been a victim of terrorism and continue to be, unfortunately, for many, many years. Thank you for talking to us, sir.
Most welcome.
Well, joining us here in the studio, Dr. Sanjay Baru, Mr. G. Parthasarathi and Praveen Swami. Dr. Baru, to you first, because I know it was actually Mr. Parthasarathi who first mooted this idea of a joint SAARC boycott, but I just wanted your thoughts on that. You heard what the Afghan ambassador was saying there. You think that's something that's viable in the immediate term?
You know, Nidhi, 15 years ago, in 2001, I actually gave a talk in the auditorium of the India International Center, where the person who chaired the meeting was our former SAARC Secretary General, Mr. Bhargava, no? Bhargava. The topic of my lecture was Wind Up SAARC. Now, it is true that over the last few years, we have tried to revive SAARC, and particularly during UPA-1, there are significant efforts made at various summits with new initiatives like the South Asian University, etc. But I think we've come a full circle. And today, in 2016, I sincerely believe that SAARC has no future if things continue like this. And I think there is an alternative which we launched along with Thailand and Myanmar in the late 90s called BIMSTEC.
Yeah.
And we have a strong Look-East policy. We need to revive and strengthen our relations with West Asia. But frankly, I do not see a very hopeful future for India-Pakistan relations.
What would happen though, Mr. Parthasarathi? Let's say India, Afghanistan and Bangladesh decide, or whichever one country decides, let the SAARC summit not happen. So what does that mean for Pakistan realistically, that boycott?
Let me put it this way, that we are not doing this in a vacuum. As Sanjay says, we have alternates to SAARC. After all, we have the quadrilateral of India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh. That's a separate, where we have an energy corridor and a communications corridor. Pakistan forbids any corridor for India through its territory. It's setting a bad example. Then, as Sanjay says, you've got BIMSTEC, which carries it further. Strategically, this whole area is a part of, dependent on the Bay of Bengal. So that's why it's called BIMSTEC, because it was originally Bay of Bengal. So I think strategically, economically, this is looking forward. What's happened in SAARC? The Pakistanis have not implemented even an existing free trade agreement. We had agreed that there was a SAARC eminent persons group which recommended that by 2010 we should have a free trade area. By 2015 we should be a customs union, and 2020 an economic union. Pakistan is determined to stop all this. Bangladesh has significantly spoken of that SAARC vision beyond the year 2000. So there is no merit, no benefit to us in SAARC. But for Pakistan, it gives it an access into the general South Asian family. After all, this is a family with a common history. So you say they stand more to lose being out of it than India does? India has nothing to lose? No, because we've got the alternates.
Yeah.
And as far as Afghanistan is concerned, as the Afghan ambassador would be quite happy, because our communications to them are through Chabahar. I mean, it's been through Iran. It will be through Chabahar much better. We're not, and the Afghans will be delighted with that, because access to Chabahar prevents Pakistani blackmail on their use of Karachi.
A quick question before I get Praveen on this, Dr. Baru, which is that, okay, so Afghanistan may play ball, let's say, and maybe Bangladesh. Do you really see any other SAARC countries coming on board, or do you think India should just stick its neck out and say, we're not going, the Prime Minister is not going?
I frankly think, the way in which Pakistan has been pushing us since 26/11, the time has come for us to tell not just our neighbors, but the big powers, stand up to be counted. I mean, how long will India take this kind of a knock, this kind of a blackmail? How long are we going to allow our friends to play double games? Whether it's the Americans or the Russians or the Chinese or the Bangladeshis or the Sri Lankans or the Maldivians or the Nepalese, I think the time has really come for us to take some tough positions and tell the world, look, these guys are out to really damage us in a very significant way. And please choose your friends. It may isolate us in some parts of the world, so be it.
But the important point is, all these neighbors lose nothing by this decision. They have no trade with Pakistan.
But you talked about this interesting thing about the double game, and you mentioned the US there, and a lot of people are getting excited, Praveen, by John Kerry's statement to Nawaz Sharif today. But careful reading of it actually shows it's the US doing the same balancing act. Well, don't use your territory, for terror groups, but you've done a good job, well done, you're fighting extremists. Everyone has to reduce tension in the region, but we're very angry about the Uri attack. So, how should we look at the American position on this?
Yeah, with all respect to the diplomats at the table, I mean, things like walking out of SAARC is fine, but it doesn't actually fix our problem. And that Kerry statement explains exactly why. For all our talk about isolating Pakistan, the reality is that most of the world, rightly or wrongly, is not going to isolate Pakistan because they believe, again, rightly or wrongly, that isolated nuclear power with its back to the wall in a state of meltdown and entropy is worse than the status quo. The status quo might be bad, but the options are even worse. And if we really think about it, most of our governments, not just this one and the ones before it, also seem to think that way, because we've gone to considerable lengths to avoid precipitating some kind of crisis which might lead us into a situation that is more costly for us than the one we have today, which is awful, but we don't want to end up somewhere more awful. This situation isn't going to end because we launch into some kind of high moral crusade about oh, Pakistan's horrible, which everyone in the world agrees, or because we go around saying that isolate it, which no one is going to do. The situation is going to change when we have the capacities, when we have a systematic and thoroughgoing capacity to deter Pakistan, and that is something which involves military and intelligence capacity building, which is not something you can do when there is a big attack. And the question has to be asked that for the last 2.5 years, it's hardly a secret that there's going to be a bad attack at some point or the other. We've had ad nauseum discussions at every level about when the next big strike or the next 26/11.
So you're saying this should have been thought out about what we could
This
do?
should have been thought out. Our special forces can't stage an attack across the line of control now because Pakistani defenses are ready. It is astounding to me that knowing that something like this can happen, we're sitting around at the highest levels of government having panchayat discussions about it now.
Head. Praveen is saying it's not that simple to isolate Pakistan. Look, one official told me the same thing yesterday. Like, you guys are talking about, economic sanctions. It's not that easy. You're not going to find many countries willing to come forward and say economically sanction them. Now, what does isolation really mean?
Look, we have exaggerated Pakistan's ability to use the nuclear blackmail by constantly referring to it as a nuclear power that we have to deal with. North Korea is a nuclear power. How many countries in the world deal with it?
So
how many of North Korea's neighbors deal with it? The world has succeeded in isolating North Korea because the big powers, sorry sir, the United States has pushed the world into isolating North Korea. And Praveen is right, you are right that the United States is not pushing Pakistan. But how long are we going to sit back?
I just want to quickly, two-line come back to that. But the reality is, though, that for years of sanctions on North Korea, despite years of South Korean protests over what is happening, the regime in North Korea is sitting pretty. The Chinese are paying for it, and for all the
yellow. That is not the issue.
I'm not saying
the issue is that you have to make Pakistan, the world know that at least in this region, we regard Pakistan as a pariah state. That is the point.
We are not talking of regime change.
We are not talking of regime change. The point is this, and I agree with this thing. We have eroded our own intelligence capabilities consciously. We are now spending 1.7% of our GDP instead of 2.3% in defense. That's a different matter. But all that does not mean we should do nothing. For God's sake, we are facing the worst terrorism apart from Afghanistan, from that neighbor of ours. We join Afghanistan, we join Bangladesh because the Pakistanis are playing games with the Jamaat Islami there. Let's put this creature in its place. And the last point, let me tell you, Nidhi, I've lived 5.5 years in Pakistan. It's a fragile society. If we choose to do to them, let Mr. Modi give the orders. What they are doing to us, we'll make them cry uncle in 5 years.
Well, I just want Praveen to comment on that. Because it's been suggested over the past couple of days that there can be a more unconventional way of dealing with this. Is that talk? Can it be done? I don't even want to speculate on what can be done because the government's not going to announce it certainly on TV.
You know, I again am perfectly willing to accept that it can be done. But I asked this question yesterday and I'll ask it again now. Let's just say for the sake of argument that somebody walks into whoever's office tomorrow and says, give me $1 million and I will blow up Hafiz Saeed for you tomorrow. Or some variant thereof. I would ask whether this actually solves your problem because the certain things flow from that. The day after Hafiz Saeed or whoever it is blown up, you can be pretty sure that whoever succeeds him is going to plant bombs in your cities, that there will be a reaction. Now, if you have a domestic counter-terrorism system that is healthy, if you have police services that are healthy, if everything is where it should be, at least you can absorb some of those blows. Today, you are not in those positions. Now, what always happens is that when something bad happens, is that people start mouthing off, looking for these quick solutions.
Just a minute.
Okay,
we're not in a position
so
to
Praveen
fix
has
it.
not lived in Pakistan. I have for 5.5 years. I know every one of their warts and moles. The problem is we have not exposed those warts and moles or acted on them. Mrs. Gandhi did it once and she did it very effectively. You need a political leadership. I hope we have that sometime to do it, because enough is enough as far as I am concerned on terrorism against us by a dysfunctional neighbor. And let me tell you one more thing. Their internal contradictions are so bad with their military fighting in 3 provinces. It doesn't take much doing to put them in their place.
Well, poor Praveen hasn't got a visa from Pakistan for years now, despite trying. But Sanjay Baru, last word.
I wouldn't give him a visa.
Sanjay Baru, on this point though, on who will come forward internationally to unequivocally support us on this? That's the question. Even now, the US is wishy-washy.
I don't care, Nidhi. I think the time has come for us to take a stand based on our national interest. Irrespective. Because the time has come to say enough is enough. We are not willing to deal with them as a normal state. This is a rogue state. We are not talking about change of attitudes. I don't think we should expect Pakistan to change its attitudes or for a regime change to happen. Probably there will be a coup and the army will take over Pakistan once again. We don't know.
And
right?
fight
That's
its own
not
people.
the issue.
Get them to fight their own people.
The issue is we have done enough. I mean, even in the media, we have been so obsessed about this India-Pakistan relationship. There's another world outside.
May I add one more point about this nonsense on isolation? I was in Moscow during the Bangladesh thing. Only the Soviets supported us. None of our neighbors supported us.
And we took a stand.
That didn't prevent Mrs. Gandhi from doing
I'll
what
just
she
say,
did.
It's time to try something different.
It is time to try something different, but I'm a little more sympathetic, I think, to both the last government and this one on this dilemma. Look, what is our strategic interest which has guided us? Our strategic interest is to grow as quickly as possible. And the reality is that in the midst of a crisis, though you may deter Pakistan, may or may not, it's a open check whether you will deter Pakistan from misbehaving in the future, it will have certain costs for us.
And you're saying ultimately every government has to weigh what those long-term
Nidhi,
costs are going to be.
Cargill did not affect our economic growth.
Gentlemen,
Cargill did not affect our economic growth.
I'm going to take this offline because I'm out of time. But thank you very much for coming in this evening and giving us your perspective on what continues to be a big story. Tomorrow, Nawaz Sharif is going to be speaking at the UN General Assembly. India's closely watching to see just how crazy he's going to go on Kashmir. So expect a lot of drama over the next couple of days. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Goodbye.
What do you think?